Is that something that we fear we potentially run the risk of overstating? That the Eagles can't win in Arizona. Well, how many guys here can you actually say that about as the
Yeah.
Eagles?
Well,
And oh, by
yeah.
the way, Sirianni has never lost in Arizona as the Eagles coach because they didn't play out there last year. Is the historical look a little bit overemphasized? You got your Mac guys. John McMullen and Jody McDonald hanging with you on Birds 365. The countdown to the Eagles' next game Sunday in Arizona against the Cardinals. The only 4-0 team left in the National Football League will try and stay undefeated on Sunday. So it's a Cardinal day if the Phillies get to a game 3 against the Cardinals. And when I say that, I mean if they don't sweep the Cardinals out in the first 2 games of the NL wild card round. It could be back-to-back Philadelphia Cardinal games on Sunday. But we're focusing in on the football game, which is going to kick off a little bit after 4 o'clock. Johnny Mac, you were on the Zoom call with Zach Ertz this week, right?
Yes. Yes.
I saw it after the fact. He said something that intrigued me. Maybe it was the way that he said it, because I certainly know about it, but he seemed to handle it a little bit differently than some of his former teammates and guys who are currently on the Eagles. That in film breakdown, that the Eagles would oftentimes go back and review practice film. That if your name, your number was up there on the screen when they were reviewing a practice session, it was not a good thing because they were pointing out something that you had done incorrectly. And Zach Ertz said, man, would that just annoy the snot? Would it just get under my skin if I knew my number was being thrown up there? We know the Eagles are a big film work team, that they use a lot of film work to better themselves, in part because they don't practice the way teams used to practice, but that's now common standard practice in the National Football League. But I didn't know that they used practice film. I certainly knew game film was a major part of the Eagles preparing each and every single week. But the way Zach laid it out there, that there's a major emphasis on the practice film. Other guys feel that way in this team, guys that you've had a chance to talk to? And I know you've got more access this year than you did last year in Sirianni's first year. It just grabbed my attention the way that Zach talked about it, that, wow, this is a big part of what the Eagles do in getting themselves up to speed on a week in, week out basis. Did I just miss that? Has that been day one Sirianni stuff, or is it something that maybe Zach just took to heart more than some other guys did?
Yeah, that's day one Sirianni stuff. He's talked about it before that he puts the player's number up there. Nick has talked about it. Yeah, that always I will say. I mean, from the film work session, yeah, I mean that's a big part of what the Eagles do, and they're looking at the practice film and just as much as the game film. But as far as what they do is if you do something wrong, they put the player up there, 86, and they say, probably with Zach, it's usually blocking, to be honest. But well, but yeah, that always struck me as Nick has explained it, and he's a big connection guy. Most football players, Jalen Hurts, we talk about it all the time, likes to be coached hard. There was a certain other quarterback that once played here that does not like to be coached hard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all with the individual and how you take it. But I do think there is a avenue for players to take that the wrong way. And that's where Nick prides himself on being able to connect with people and players. And it's interesting. I think it was 2 weeks ago. Someone asked him, "Has there ever been a player you couldn't connect with?" And he wouldn't give out names, obviously, but he said, "Of course." Oh, I mean, yeah, that's life,
Right. To go 53 for 53
Yeah,
is pretty difficult.
yeah. So yeah, when you single out players, they could take it the wrong way. Eagles have a lot of veterans. Eagles are And Nick also points out that usually when you're a first year head coach in this league, um, you got a pretty crappy offensive line and pretty crappy defensive line, because you're usually a bad football team, and that's where it starts. And he came into a unique situation where they had a really good offensive line that had a really injury plagued season, and things have settled down from that. And they had a really good defensive line. And he says all the time how lucky he was as a head coach, and then they built up around those two groups. Um, but yeah, that is something that he's talked about, and he puts up numbers, and it is interesting. I will say that.
You mentioned that the Eagles have some pretty experienced veterans on this team, and for the most part, that's a really good thing if they're playing at a high level, and the Eagles have those type of players. But it is also a carryover thing, and the Eagles have a couple of guys who have gone out into Arizona and not had success there. The Eagles have struggled when they've gone coast to coast, specifically against the Cardinals, and sometimes it's been a mismatch. The Cardinals with a better roster than the Eagles. Sometimes the Eagles have had a better roster than the Cardinals. Like this year, I would suggest that's the case, but it still hasn't ended up in an Eagle victory. Is that something that we fear we potentially run the risk of overstating that, the Eagles can't win in Arizona? Well, how many guys here can you actually say that about as the
Yeah.
Eagles?
Well,
And oh, by
yeah.
the way, Sirianni has never lost in Arizona as the Eagles coach because they didn't play out there last year. Is the historical look a little bit overemphasized?
I think it's always overemphasized in the NFL, to tell you the truth, especially out of division games. Maybe in the division it's meaningful because you play teams every year,
Mm-hmm.
and out of the division, out of the conference, even more so. You don't see teams for years in certain instances. Um, so it's not a large sample size, and the sample size itself is, as you mentioned, Jody, you're not even talking about the same players. So why could it have any relevance other than people place relevance on it? Now, the stuff that is meaningful is, it's a difficult trip. It's cross country. It's a long flight. You got banged up players. That's not the most comfortable, even though they get to fly a little bit nicer than the rest of us. It's still not the most comfortable thing in the world. And you're in and out. It's not like a baseball road trip where you're in a city for a couple days and you're in and out. It's, NFL road games from that standpoint, it's always more about the situation. And then Dallas, 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 Dallas. To me, this is a natural trap game. It's a natural trap game. You're better. You're going across the country. You're thinking about Dallas. Let's be honest. The Eagles do a very good job of staying in the moment. Nick constantly preaches it. Jalen constantly preaches it. I think there's a lot of players that can do it, but I think there's a lot of players that can't do it. And they start looking ahead. And, the best example of this yesterday, I don't know if you saw Jalen Hurts' press conference, but he didn't get one question about the Arizona Cardinals, to the point where he, at the end, said on his own, I want to talk about the Cardinals, and they're a good football team. And he gave the Lou Holtz platitudes, talking them up. Um, he went out of his way. And I think he kind of felt, people are talking about the Manning cast, and, what he said about Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and this and that, everything but the Arizona Cardinals, to the point where he said, we were all leaving. We were all getting up from his chairs. And he stayed in his chair, and he said, oh, and I want to bring this up. And he talked about the Arizona Cardinals. Um, so to me, that was a clear indication that he knows that this is a potential trap game, and he wants to keep the focus on the Arizona Cardinals.
Let me see if I can get you to clarify or classify where the Dallas Cowboys fall on the John McMullen stinkometer. because you said the Cardinals stink
They do stink.
and the Giants are 3-1, but they stink. Do the
They
Cowboys
stink.
stink?
The Cowboys do not stink. The Giants stink. The Cowboys are a good team. I don't know how many great teams there are. Maybe 2 or 3, and the Eagles are probably one of them in the snapshot. And that's just what it is, a snapshot. But the Cowboys, they got some players. They got some players. And we talked about one of them, Micah Parsons. There's a guy who can wreck a game. Um, a playmaker like Trayvon Diggs. They're very top heavy, but their talented players are really, really talented. And everybody thought, oh, it's over. They don't have Dak Prescott. They can't win a game. All they do is win games, because Cooper Rush is taking care of the football, game managing. They're not winning games because of Cooper Rush, but he's not losing games. And when you can put Cooper Rush in and win games, that tells you got a pretty good team. And I think the Cowboys have a good team.
I agree with you, and that's why I think the point you've made a couple times now is carries some water. If they had lost last week to the Commanders, may I suggest that John McMullen would say the Cowboys stink too? If they were 2-2 and had lost to Washington the same way the Eagles had just beaten Washington, it's as much as one game could do. I think one game would swing the balance because they're 3-1, because Cooper Rush is 3-0, and the Eagles will not be worried about the Cowboys till after this game is over, except in the back of their mind. Yeah, I think you're right, John. I think certainly the Cowboys on so many different levels is so much more an important game than this Cardinal game that maybe the focus isn't exactly 100%. And I'm not going to say this is a look ahead game, but could it be a bit of a trap game? I hope our listeners and our viewers understand what you and I mean when we use the word trap game. Yeah, I do think that's the case with Dallas in the offing next week, and it does scare me a little bit. So that comes back to the coach and the way that he prepares and the way that he gets his team ready for the game and the way that he keeps them focused. I don't know. Did we have a situation last year with the Eagles where we go, ooh, that's a trap game? Or is
Nah,
this the
well,
first time we've
nah.
done this with Sirianni?
Probably. I would have. I don't recall. I mean, they weren't good enough to.
Right. That's yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah. And so I don't think it was. You always look at out of conference games and out of division games first as potential trap games. You always look at the games before you're playing Dallas or somebody of that nature, but they just weren't good enough to have trap games last year. This year, they're good enough, and Nick Sirianni, I can tell you, believes in them, um, but and he thinks they're real. And I'm talking about trap games, so he's well. And like I said, and that's why I bring that up. That struck me as it was very out of character, and it was very calculated what Jalen Hurts did yesterday. And I think it's another indication of how on point he is as the leader of this team to go out of his way, say, we got to talk about the Arizona Cardinals because everybody's talking about this stinking Manning cast. I thought it was very important, and it was a clear signal he was trying to send to his teammates.
All right, John, I was going through some of the stats this morning, team versus team, Eagles versus Cardinals, and there was only one that kind of jumped out at me. I said, really, I would have bet against that. The Eagles have actually given up more sacks this year than the Cardinals. 8 in 4 games for the Eagles, which is not great, but not terrible either. It's like, oh my God, Jalen Hurts holding on to the ball too long, or a bad play by the Eagles offensive line, which we don't expect because of the level of the talent that they have there. But they've given up 8, and the Cardinals have only been sacked 6 times. More so the Cardinals' opposition. Are we not giving the Cardinals' offensive line enough credit? Only 6 sacks in 4 games is actually a pretty good number for Arizona. How do you think Gannon attacks that coming in?
I think Kyler's more the issue when you're talking about the pass rush. As Damo said, you have to be very disciplined with Kyler Murray and quarterbacks like him. Always, because they can hurt you when they get outside of the pocket. So it's more about discipline this week than just pinning your ears back. Like you could pin your ear back and go after Kirk Cousins, and as you mentioned, Carson Wentz. You just go, and you don't have to worry about it. This week, you have to worry about it. So alignment assignment, which is not sexy and not what Eagles fans want to hear. I don't think it's going to be must rush like Damo mentioned, but yeah, they have to be very, very disciplined when it comes to Kyler Murray. So this, if it's a big sack week, I'm not going to say it's not going to be a big sack week because he's also going to hold on to the football. So that gives you an opportunity to get some sacks, but it's not going to be a week where you're pinning your ears back, as I said. You can't do that against Kyler Murray. If you do, he's going to gash you.
And it's something we'll certainly run by Howard Balzer, who's supposed to join us coming up in the next 5, 6, 7 minutes. J.J. Watt, who needed to have his heart jumped in the middle of the week to get ready and play this week. Man, that's a scary thing when you read something like that. But not only was he okay, he was on the defensive line contributing to the Cardinal win last week. He's still one of the better defensive linemen in the National Football League. He might not be the best, and in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year, that would be his brother when his brother's healthy. He's not right now. But Watt can still make plays for the Cardinals. Again, don't do breakdown on film of the Cardinals. You think they'll move Watt along? Do you think they'll move him around on that defensive line? That's been one of his key strengths for his Hall of Fame type career is he can come at you from any direction. How do you think they'll deploy him, John?
Yeah, we'll have to ask Howard, but I would assume because they don't have, they no longer have a Chandler Jones, and they need to create some kind of pass rush. They do have Marcus Golden, who I guess is, would be considered their best edge rusher. But yeah, I mean, you have to take advantage. JJ's been able to do that for many years, as you mentioned. And he's not the player. He was one of the best defensive players ever in Houston, to be honest. So I don't think he's still at that level, but they haven't played well defensively. I think their issues have been more defensive than offensive, even without DeAndre Hopkins. But they need to figure things out on the defensive side of the football.
Eagles and Cardinals Sunday in Arizona. We'll talk about it next from a Cardinal perspective. Howard Balzer, all-time great NFL writer, doing his writing this week, these days for PHNX.com, host on SiriusXM's Hall of Fame radio show. Hall of Fame selector Howard Balzer joins us next here on Birds 365.